Hello everybody, it's me, Fiona, also known as White Zulu. I must explain from the start that the old apartheid flag, die Vierkleur, in my new background does not represent a political statement in any way whatsoever. My autobiography, White Zulu, is not a political commentary, nor does it include any particular references to apartheid and what it entailed. That flag is consigned to history now, and as I had no means of imposing a photograph on top of it, it remains on my wall. All that flag represents is a piece of history covering the first 44 years of my life. So please ignore it as exactly what it is. A meaningless piece of cloth now consigned.
No. Hello, everybody. Sweet Tim's here again, Fiki or the White Zulu, and we're going to continue with my Swiss escapades. And I left you where Pierre, the Onshow family's younger son, well, only son, had decided to marry Brita, the Danish girl, on an impulse. And I'd been asked to mediate rather, and try and talk him out of it because she'd been cheating on him. Anyway, we carry on from there. He'd flown to Denmark, and now he'd come back. A week later, Pierre came home. He looked pale, drained, and exhausted. It's off, he told us all. Catherine had taken time off from her nursing shifts to be at home when he arrived. She was very angry and said I was lying, but I told her she'd been seen with other guys while we were a couple. His parents, trying to show sympathy instead of relief, patted him consolingly on his shoulder, and his sister hugged him. "You're too good for her," she said gently. "There's somebody so much better waiting for you out there. And you really are too young to be tying yourself down so soon. I know you. You love girls, and you have plenty of time and the opportunity to play the field for a good long time yet." Much later that evening, when everybody else had gone to bed, Pierre sat down with me in the TV room. "You know," he said, "when I got to Denmark, she wasn't even waiting for me at the airport, and I wondered why. I know it was a last-minute arrangement, my going all the way there to speak to her in person. But she must have been too afraid to meet me, which indicates that she might have had a bit of a guilty conscience." He pondered this for a moment and continued, "If she had been so much in love with me, it might have made sense that she'd fetch me from the airport, as she has use of her dad's car, and they don't live that far away. Surely she would have been longing to see me." "I suppose so," I replied, "but I suspect she was already wondering why you'd come and got scared that she'd been found out." "Yes," Pierre nodded. "When I got to her house, we went straight out to a cafe and sat there while I asked her some questions. She became more defensive and angrier with me, telling me I shouldn't believe other people's lies, and I should give her the benefit of the doubt. And while she was raging at me, I sat still and looked at her long and hard. All I could see was a cross, dumpy little woman wearing a navy coat and a red beret, and I wondered what I'd ever seen in her in the first place. This had nothing to do with the issue at hand, what she'd supposedly been doing behind my back, but it dawned on me the realization that I wasn't in love with her at all. I suddenly felt a great weight lift off my shoulders, and I told her that it was over. I'd like my engagement ring back, and I'd go on the first plane back to Geneva. I've been at home ever since then, mulling over what a lucky escape I'd had. Just think, I would have been tied to that cross little woman for the rest of my life. He stood up and yawned. I'm so glad you feel relieved, I said. I was really worried that I'd spoken out of turn and ruined your life. But I didn't want you going into that marriage with your eyes closed. And I realized, having lived with her and spending every day with her for the last 3 months, that I probably knew her better than you did. The real Britta, that is, not the side she showed you at the weekends. And secretly, even I felt that she wasn't really in love with you. If she had been, why did she kiss all those other guys? I stayed on with the Anchos and began to enjoy wandering around the pretty little village, now that the snow had melted away, leaving just a little bit lying on the very top peaks of La Braille. There were millions of early wild flowers peeping through the soft green spring grass, and so many crystal clear streams rippled down from the mountains and into the gutters as snow melt. There were bright blue gentians, cranesbills, scarlet geraniums, which were mostly in window boxes on the balconies, globe flowers, pretty little orange jonquils, golden buttercups, bright yellow daffodils, and white daisies. There were so many others, none of which I knew the names of, but in every colour imaginable: mauve, scarlet, pink, pale blue, deep blues and purples featured, as well as yellows and snowy white. There were puffballs of purple and delicate trumpets with yellow stamens, and the ground was carpeted with all these, all the way through the village, its surroundings, and right up the slopes on which we'd skied so happily just a few weeks ago. I saw colourful bunting and banners festooned all over the shops and chalets that line the main street. The red Swiss flag with its white cross in the centre flew proudly everywhere, and women of all ages hung over their balconies, beating carpets with clover leaf rattans, getting rid of all the fine dust accumulated over such a long winter. Colette told me that there would be a festival the next weekend, to be held when the farmers living in the village and throughout the valley itself took all their cows up to graze on the sweet new spring pastures on the mountain sides. Pierre was coming up for this annual event, and Catherine too. On the morning of the festival, I was woken quite early by a loud, musical clanging sound. I looked out of the window, but my room overlooked the slopes of La Braille, and I couldn't see anything happening on the meadows that fell gradually away to the river below. I pulled on my jeans and a blouse and ran downstairs to where the rest of the family was sitting down to breakfast. Colette and Monsieur told me a little bit about this historical festival, saying that for countless centuries Everybody in the village always turned out to see the cattle go through on their way up to the mountain pastures. It was an ancient tradition dating back to the Middle Ages. We strolled down to the little square and stood with the colourfully dressed crowd of locals. Nearly all the women, from small girls to bent-over pensioners in their 90s, were dressed in Swiss national dress, with variations which I assumed was Vaudoise, the canton or province we lived in. They wore mainly red or maroon dirndl dresses, reminding me of illustration in my childhood picture book Heidi. The delicate white blouses underneath had short puffed sleeves edged with handmade lace, and the décolletage square neckline was also a froth of snowy lace. The overblouse was square cut and trimmed with embroidery in all varieties of colours. The front of the overblouse was decoratively laced together in criss-cross fashion at the front, and the skirt flared out prettily, almost like a ballerina's, but made of velvet or similar material. Underneath the skirts, more snowy white lace peeped out from layers of petticoats just below knee length, and they wore long white lacy socks with wooden clogs like the Dutch wear, or Mary Jane shoes. A lot of the girls my age and younger wore their natural ash blonde hair in two plaits, the ends of which they decorated with brightly coloured satin ribbons or wild flowers. The whole effect was enchanting, and I secretly wished I'd been better prepared so that I could have looked as pretty as the local girls did. "Look," exclaimed Silette, and pointed up the street we'd just come down. A substantially large brass band, complete with accordions, marched and played. All the players were men dressed in short, suede lederhosen, with brightly embroidered floral patterns on their pockets and H-shaped braces, rather than normal over-the-shoulder ones. They wore jaunty little leather hats with flowers and feathers stuck in the bands. Some had tiny brass cowbells tied around their calves over their long socks. On their feet they wore wooden clogs, similar to those I'd seen in Dutch paintings. Behind the band walked similarly dressed men. This time each one led his favourite cow on a decorated, hand-embroidered halter. Round the cow's neck hung a very big, highly polished brass cowbell, with the strap equally beautifully embroidered in bright colours. Reds, greens, yellows, blues and white featured most of all in the intricate patterns. The procession made its slow, dignified way past all the villages as we cheered and waved, and some women showered them with wild flowers picked from their lawns. There were so many cows being led, and behind each halted cow trailed the rest of that man's herd, and then the next, and so on. I caught a glimpse of Louis Ami leading a cow, and after he'd seen me waving frantically to catch his attention, he drew his cow to the side next to the pavement for me to admire. Louis Ami looked quite different out of his ski outfit, and his lederhosen and braces were exquisitely made. "This cow belongs to my grandfather," he told me proudly. "He's walking on ahead with his prize milker." I caressed the gentle brown beast on her face. She reminded me of a Jersey cow with those enormous dark and almost liquid pools for eyes, fringed by her long, thick eyelashes. What breed is she? I asked him. We call them brown Swiss cows, he replied. They are a specific breed for these mountainous conditions, and excellent milkers. I'll let her go once we've cleared the village and send her up the mountainside behind where our chalet is, and she'll join the rest of the herd up there for the spring and summer. They all keep their bells on throughout the summer, so we know where they are when it's milking time. What are you going to do in the summer now you're not teaching skiing or looking after your grandpère's cattle in the byre? I asked, feeling rather bold and hoping that it didn't look like I was fishing for a date now that Jonty had left. Although, of course, I was. I must get my horses ready, he said. Horses? I exclaimed. I didn't know you have horses. Where have you been keeping them all this time? Here, in the village, in stables on Grandpère's farm. 2 of them. The army provides all their food and blankets and other tack. The army? I was amazed. I had no idea Louis Ami was in the army. Yes. I'm doing my 2 years conscription in the cavalry, he said. I still have 6 months left. Then I'm free to find a job or do some training for a career. I'd like to do something in the veterinary field with animals, like my aunt Silette's husband did, but hopefully work more with horses. I felt he was a kindred spirit and wished even more fervently that I'd had him for a boyfriend instead of lucky old Jonty. She hated animals, particularly horses, and had no wish to go near any of them. Louis and I had so much in common. I was just about to tell him about my having grown up on horseback and was longing to ride again when he had to interrupt me. I see my grandpère signalling me to move on. See you sometime. I'm going back to my barracks in June. And with that, he was gone. The rest of the parade was a deafening jangling and clanging of cowbells as the entire herds of all the farmers in the valley of Chateau d'Ay clattered by. And all through that spring and summer, day and night, I heard the pleasant sound of cowbells clanging faintly out on the mountainsides as they grazed.
That is all for the time being, and there's more to come next week. I would like to thank John Moslane for putting aside his Friday afternoons to help me produce these videos. Without him, I could not do this. I would also like to thank Sean van Vuren for his sterling work in uploading my videos to my YouTube channel, adding the photos, as well as managing my channel so professionally. If you would like to know more about my other works, I have written 5 books in all, and each one is autobiographical. Please visit my website at www.whitezulubook.com, where you will find a lot more information as well as plenty of photographs. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed my life story, and there is plenty more to come. A thumbnail photo will be attached each week, and thank you so much for all your support and all the very kind remarks you make in complimenting me on my work. I really appreciate it.